I'm Dawn Hill, host of Heart, Mind, and Purpose, a podcast where we explore what it means to live an aligned and wholehearted life. I am a professional counselor with over 25 years of experience and a deep love for meaningful conversation. I bring you honest reflections, soulful questions, and meaningful tools for managing life. Whether you're seeking clarity, connection, or simply a space to breathe, this podcast is here for you. Tune in weekly and join me on the journey.
Welcome to Heart, Mind, and Purpose, the podcast where we explore how our inner lives shape the way we love, connect, and grow. Hi, this is Paul Gramercy, producer of today's episode, where Dawn helps us understand an important question many people quietly carry. Am I just stressed, or is this something deeper? By gently unpacking the difference between everyday stress and trauma, Dawn offers clarity, insight, and practical tools to help you recognize what your body and mind may be trying to tell you and how to respond with care. Now here's your host, Dawn Hill.
Welcome back to Heart, Mind, and Purpose. Today we're talking about something many people quietly wonder about but don't always know how to put into words. Thinking things like, am I just stressed, or is this something deeper? If you've been feeling irritable, exhausted, overwhelmed, or like you're carrying the weight you cannot shake, this episode is for you, because knowing the difference between stress and trauma isn't about labels. It's about understanding what your body and mind are asking for, and what kind of care and support you actually need. So let's slow this down together and take a closer look at what stress really is, what trauma really is, and why recognizing the difference can change the way you care for yourself. If you're feeling irritable, exhausted, or like you're carrying a weight you can't shake, you might wonder, am I just stressed, or is this something bigger, like trauma? This is a natural question, especially when you are feeling like nothing feels normal right now. Knowing the difference is important, is more than just getting a label right, because this can impact your relationships, your health, and the kind of support you actually need. Let me give you an example. Imagine two people where one person has had a brutal week, deadlines, sick kids, no sleep. They're snapping at people, exhausted and overwhelmed. But after a good weekend, a nap, and things settling down, they feel like themselves again. That's stress. Now imagine another person who's had a hard week, but they don't bounce back. Their body still feels on edge. They feel unsafe, irritable, disconnected, and maybe even numb. Nothing big happened this week, but something inside them feels stirred up and is unsettled in a way that they can't explain. That's often trauma being activated. From the outside, these two people can look the same. From the inside, they are very different. Both stress and trauma show up in nearly everyone's life at some point in time. However, knowing their effects and how and what kind of help you need are very far apart. Once we know which one we are dealing with, we can know what our next step or steps might be. At the heart of it, stress and trauma aren't the same, even though in the moment both can leave you feeling pretty shaken up. Stress is a natural part of life. It pops up when life hands you challenges, changes, or even exciting new opportunities. Maybe it's deadlines at work, a pile of bills, or keeping up with a fast-paced household. Your body gets revved up, you push through, and eventually things settle down. That's stress doing its job, and in most cases it passes. Trauma, on the other hand, goes deeper. It's usually the result of experiences that are so overwhelming, scary, or out of your control they knock you loose from your basic sense of safety or who you are. Trauma can be big events like serious accidents or violence, or not. It can also come from ongoing struggles like growing up in a neglectful home, facing daily discrimination, or years of silent suffering at work. Instead of fading with time, trauma often sticks around, shaping your body, brain, and mood in ways you may not fully recognize at first. What really sets the two apart is how your brain and your body bounce back, or don't. Stress might get your heart pounding for a bit, but trauma hijacks your systems. Your nervous system, how your body remembers, how your brain and thinking change long term, and changing the way you see yourself and the world. Needing to understand the difference is more than just cognitive understanding. It is how we will know what we need next. Stress is our body's response to extra demands that are above your normal daily strain. It grabs your attention, demands a response from experiences like deadlines at work, heavy traffic, a situation at your child's school, paying the bills, or juggling too many things. It pushes past what is normal, and then we find we must adjust and adapt. Trauma, on the other hand, is more than the stress of an extra load or a tough day. It usually comes from experiences of events or circumstances that are too much to process. For instance, ongoing abuse, emotional neglect as a child, surviving a car accident, or your house burning down, just to name a few. Trauma will leave you with a deep sense and lasting feelings of being in danger, helpless. Often it has shaken your sense of your foundation being solid and safe, and leaves you wondering, is the world still safe? If you find yourself looking back at certain moments or seasons of your life and wondering whether they mattered, ask yourself this: did you feel overwhelmed, different, or somehow unlike yourself afterward? So let's consider how to recognize the difference between everyday stress and trauma, both of which impact our nervous system, but in different ways. Understanding the differences allow us to respond with care and choose the tools that support our healing and resilience. So let's look at stress first. Stress is, first of all, a normal reaction to life's demands and pressures, then often temporary and situation-based, and can motivate us to help or adapt, or symptoms reduce when the stressor is resolved. On the other hand, trauma is an overwhelming experience that exceeds our abilities to cope, leaves a lasting imprint on the nervous system, can be caused by a single event or ongoing exposure, and can disrupt our sense of safety, memory, and connection. This is how they feel let's start with the body. In the body, stress feels like muscle tension, headaches, and fatigue. And in trauma, it feels like numbness, chronic pain, freeze, or the shutdown response. In our emotional zone, stress feels like irritability, overwhelm, and frustration. Trauma feels like fear, shame, helplessness, and emotional numbing. In our thinking zone, stress is more like racing thoughts and distraction, where trauma is intrusive thoughts, dissociation, and confusion. And behaviorally, stress is avoidance and snapping at others, while trauma is more like isolation, hypervigilance, and loss of interest. When life feels like too much stress and trauma comes in many different shapes and sizes, some are short and sharp, like a sudden argument or a minor fender bender, while others stick around and wear us down over months or even years. There are different types of stress. First, acute stress is what you feel in the face of an immediate perceived threat and is what you feel in response to a one-time challenge, like giving a big speech or dealing with a car that won't start. It may feel intense, but it usually passes when things calm down. Then there is chronic stress, which is a consistent, long-term state of feeling overwhelmed, pressured, and exhausted due to prolonged, unrelenting, or recurring stressors that build slowly. It creeps in with endless work pressure, financial worries, or relationship conflicts that seem to have no finish line. When stress is not just frequent, but severe, especially without enough support, it can turn toxic. Toxic stress occurs when there is excessive or prolonged activation of the stress response systems in the brain and body. Chronic stress can disrupt healthy development of the brain and other bodily systems, increasing risk for stress-related disease well into adulthood. It's the kind of stress that leaves you always on edge, anxious, or just plain worn out, and over time it can chip away at your health. Acute trauma refers to distressing psychological experiences triggered by a single, clearly definable event that overwhelms an individual's coping capacity and disrupts their sense of safety and predictability. Typically, acute traumatic events occur unexpectedly, limited in duration, and carry a high emotional intensity at the moment of the occurrence. Some common examples of acute trauma include car accidents or transportation-related incidences, or natural disasters, for example, earthquakes, floods, or fires, a sudden personal loss or bereavement, or violent assaults or robbery, or unexpected medical crises or traumatic hospitalizations. Despite their brief and isolated nature, these experiences can profoundly impact an individual's emotional equilibrium, sense of security, and overall psychological well-being. Chronic trauma is one of the three main types of traumas commonly discussed by professionals, along with acute trauma and complex trauma. Chronic trauma occurs when you are repeatedly exposed to traumatic events over a period of time. Chronic trauma is cumulative in nature, meaning that the impact of chronic trauma grows with each instance of exposure, which in turn can increase the severity in symptoms and outcomes. It is the kind that grows by living through hardship after hardship with no break, whether at home, at work, or in your community. The compounded or cumulative effect of chronic trauma can also cause a lot of distress and can result in the development of mental health conditions like post-traumatic stress disorder, commonly referred to as PTSD. Complex trauma usually comes from multiple difficult events layered over time, especially in early life, like growing up in a chaotic household or experiencing repeated loss, experiencing abuse or abuses, and neglect during childhood. Developmental trauma is when those tough experiences happened early in childhood, weaving themselves into your growing brain and how you relate to yourself and the world. Understanding these categories is about more than just definition. It's a way to see your own story in a new light, and hopefully to let go of any guilt or self-blame for how deeply these things can affect you. You might start to notice stress showing itself in little ways. Maybe your heart races just before a big meeting, you feel restless at night, or your patience wears thin with every minor setback. Stress will give you these hints through your body. Headaches, muscle tension, an upset stomach, or trouble falling to sleep because the body knows before the mind does. Emotionally, you can feel irritable, anxious, or even just worn down. Most people recognize these signs as typical stress, even when they're persistent. And trauma shows up in a whole different way. It can look like anxiety or sleepless nights, and it often throws in more serious symptoms, things like feeling emotionally numb, having flashbacks to an event you would rather forget, or being overwhelmed by panic out of nowhere. Additionally, you may feel jumpy, become startled easily, or constantly reliving the worst moments. At other times, and for some people, they can feel disconnected from themselves or have trouble trusting people or experiencing the sensation of numbness, chronic pain, or having the feeling of freezing or shut down responses. Trauma can also show up as physical symptoms, and they tend to stick around longer and may not improve even when life gets easier. If you find yourself replaying painful memories, feeling unsafe even when nothing is wrong, or struggling with big emotions that don't seem to fit the situation, it is possible you're dealing with more than just everyday stress. Sometimes symptoms like emotional shutdown, suicidal thoughts, or a sense of total overwhelm are signals that trauma might be present. Recognizing the difference matters, not just for understanding yourself, but for knowing when it's time to reach out for help that fits what you're experiencing. It is also important for your healing and having hope. When you live with chronic stress or unprocessed trauma, these are not just sitting in your head, they will show up in your body as well. For example, tension, headaches, stomach and digestive issues, chronic pain, and disrupted sleep. over time, which could be months or years, and this could lead to issues with your immune system, which could cause you to be more susceptible to bugs or flus in your environment. The mental health side of this can be just as hard. Chronic exposure wears down your resilience. You might become more sensitive to mild annoyances, feeling like they are emergencies. You can become hypervigilant, which equals always on alert. All of this can create an internal atmosphere where you spiral into anxiety, ongoing intense worry, or even a deep depression. For some, trauma opens the door to a diagnosis of PTSD or major depressive disorder. Daily life doesn't flow along like it once did. For instance, you may start feeling distant, disconnected, or withdraw from people. You may feel foggy and unfocused at work or just in general. Some find it difficult not to lose their temper, not being in control of what they once were. Relationships start to fray, jobs can suffer. The things that once brought you joy don't spark that same sense of joy as they once did. It is very important to remember that you are not weak, that these are evidence that your systems have been struggling to handle more than its fair share of the load. Don't let this get out of hand, and before you start to spiral, reach out to get help. There is hope. You can't treat trauma with stress management tools, and you don't need trauma therapy for normal stress. That's why the distinction matters here so much. If the struggle feels deeper or your symptoms just aren't letting up, it might be time for a trauma-informed approach. Working with a professional who specializes in trauma can open doors to healing in ways that just dealing with it or white-knuckling through alone never could. Interventions like EMDR, which is a gentle brain-body-based therapy, can help process the pain without having to retell it over and over. If you're looking for a focused, efficient pathway to healing, therapy can help you process the trauma and lead to a healthier way of being. There is help, and there's no shame in needing help. In fact, there is hope. Here are a few questions you could ask yourself. Can I return to calm after the challenge passes? Is this stress related to something specific and time limited? Does the experience make me feel unsafe, powerless, or disconnected? Or are my reactions bigger than the situation warrants? The answers to those questions may help you know if you need to reach out for more professional help. Recognizing trauma is essential for knowing when we need help more than a wellness tip, that we may need trauma-informed care. Offering ourselves compassion instead of criticism, and avoiding burnout by responding appropriately to what we are carrying. Supportive tools for stress relief like deep breathing, physical activity, music, movement, and nature, talking with a friend are not the same as trauma care. For trauma healing, here are a few things to consider. First, this is a grounding technique called the 5 senses, which is a tool for anxiety but can really help in the moment. So first of all, you ask yourself to name 5 things you can see at this very moment. Second, then name 4 things you can hear. Third, name 3 things you can feel, like your feet in your shoes, your legs on the chair. Then fourth, name 2 things you can smell. And fifth, name 1 thing you can taste, even if that's just the inside of your own mouth or a cold sip of water. Additionally, there's also therapy with a trauma-informed clinician, EMDR, somatic therapy, cultural rituals, support circles, or community healing spaces. As we wrap up today, I want you to remember this. Your experiences are valid, and you deserve tools that honor what you've been through. Whether you're carrying this stress, trauma, or a mix of both, the goal is not to push through harder. It is to respond with understanding, gentleness, and the right kind of support for where you are at. You don't have to figure it out all at once. There is help, there is hope, and there are always ways to feel more like yourself again. Until next time, may you be kind to your heart, clear in your mind, and grounded in your purpose. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Heart, Mind, and Purpose. If today's conversation helps you better understand what you may be carrying, We invite you to share this episode with someone who might need it too. You can find resources, listener handouts, and information about trauma-informed care at dawnmariehill.com/heart. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode as we keep exploring how the heart, the mind, and our sense of purpose all work together for a life well lived. If you have questions or comments, please contact Dawn at heartmindandpurpose.podcast@gmail.com. Until next time, thanks for listening.